Welcome back, my friends. In our previous episode, we went over the life of King David, and now today we're going to be discussing whom I believe is the second greatest king that has probably ever reigned on the earth. I consider King David as the greatest ruler that has ever ruled on the earth, but King Josiah would come in at a very close second. The old Bible commentator Adam Clarke commented on King Josiah, saying that he was one of the best, if not the best, of all the Jewish kings since the time of David. He began well, continued well, and ended well. So great of a king was Josiah that around 300 years before he ever even took the throne of David, he was prophesied by the Lord through a prophet to this King Jeroboam, in whom we discussed in another episode. King Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom. So let's go back a few hundred years before Josiah takes the throne. And remember at the time of King Jeroboam how the nation of Israel as a whole had split into two kingdoms after the reign of King Solomon. King Jeroboam ruled to the north, and King Rehoboam, he took the throne that Josiah would later take, and that's of the kingdom of Judah to the south. And as you all no doubt recall, Jeroboam, instead of allowing his people to the north, journeyed to the south in order to celebrate the feast days within Solomon's temple, because he feared that he would lose his power at that time. He sets up these two golden calves. Remember, Jeroboam and his two golden calves. And he is at this church of these two golden calves, this idolatry that has just been set up in Israel and that would be a mainstay throughout these hundreds of years. And all of a sudden, a prophet approaches while Jeroboam is burning incense unto one of these golden calves at Bethel. And behold, there came a man of God, 1 Kings 13, and behold, there came a man of God out of Judah by the way of the Lord unto Bethel, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And he cried against the altar in the word of the Lord, and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name, and upon thee shall he offer the priest of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee, meaning that Josiah would show up later on. By name does it name Josiah. Now fast forward from the time of Jeroboam about 200 years later, and the Assyrians from the north, they come down, they invade, and they conquer these idolatrous Israelites to the north, leaving only the kingdom of Judah left to reign over what is Israel. And it's around that time that Ahaz is ruling over Judah, followed by Hezekiah, then the evil king Manasseh, to which we made another video about how evil Manasseh was. He was probably the most evil of all the kings of Judah and Israel, as a matter of fact. But he also reigned the longest at 55 years. Well, Manasseh, he repents by the end, and he tries to have this revival of God within Judah. But he winds up dying, and then his son Ammon takes over. And Ammon is just an exceedingly evil king. And Ammon does not reign but about 2 years. Manasseh's son Ammon only reigned for 2 years before he was assassinated at 24 years old. Now that's very young to die. So how old could Josiah have been, his son? Well, he was very, very young. And this means that Ammon had to have had Josiah around 16 years old. 2 Kings 22 goes on to tell us how Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Jedidah, the daughter of Ediah of Boscath. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in all the way of David his father, and turned not aside to the right hand or to the left. Now notice how Josiah only reigns 31 years. He's 8 years old, so he dies at 39. He doesn't even reach the age of 40. Well, this is really the only blemish that one could maybe point out within Josiah's reign, and we'll come to that, how he dies. But in his 18th year of his reign, Josiah ordered money to be raised to repair Solomon's temple. While repairing, Hilkiah the high priest finds the original Book of the Law, one of the two copies that we believe Moses made of the Book of Deuteronomy, more than likely, which is then promptly brought before the king. He finds this Book of Deuteronomy, we believe, in the temple. Once again, Adam Clarke noted how the simple fact seems to be this, that this was the original of the covenant renewed by Moses with the people in the plains of Moab, and which he ordered to be laid up beside the ark. Some think that Moses wrote two copies, one of which he gave to the priests and Levites for general use, to which they would go on and copy for hundreds and hundreds of years, and now we have the book of Deuteronomy and such. The other to be laid up beside the ark as a standard copy for reference, and that's the one that they found, and to be a witness against the people should they break it or become idolatrous, which by the time of Josiah, the people had fallen so badly into idolatry. So it's important to note how this is the original copy from Moses that is being read to King Josiah at this time, and how it's not just a copy of a copy. And this makes it far more special to the king to hear the words written directly from Moses himself. Upon Josiah hearing the words of judgment against their nation as a consequence of perpetual backsliding, the king rents his clothes because he hears the judgments of God upon an idolatrous nation, and he knows what his father and his grandfather have done to the nation at that point, and it terrifies him. So this really sparks a revival within King Josiah. Josiah then orders his chief servants, including the high priest Hilkiah, to inquire of the prophetess Huldah concerning what should be done in order to avoid God's wrath. So they go up to this prophetess. Now, mind you, the prophet Jeremiah is alive at this time. It's then that the prophetess tells them in verse 16, "Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will bring evil upon this place and upon the inhabitants thereof, even all the words of the book which the king of Judah hath read." Remember, in the book of Jeremiah, the Lord says that it's because of Josiah's grandfather that it's the final straw for Israel. But this is one last great revival within the land at King Josiah, because it would be King Josiah's descendants in whom would be the culmination before the Babylonian captivity. "Because they have forsaken me, and have burned incense unto other gods, that they might provoke me to anger with all the works of their hands. Therefore my wrath shall be kindled against this place, and shall not be quenched. But to the king of Judah, Josiah, which sent you to inquire of the Lord, thus shall ye say to him, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, as touching the words which thou hast heard, because thine heart was tender, and thou hast humbled thyself before the Lord, when thou heardest what I spake against this place, and against the inhabitants thereof, that they should become a desolation and a curse, and hast rent thy clothes, and wept before me, I also have heard thee. Behold, therefore, I will gather thee unto thy fathers, and thou shalt be gathered into thy grave in peace. And thine eyes shall not see all the evil which I will bring upon this place. And they brought the king word again. The king then orders the people to assemble in the house of the Lord, Solomon's temple, in order to hear him read the book of the law. And this is something that they were supposed to do every 7 years. In Deuteronomy 31, it is commanded that every 7 years the book of the law, in essence Deuteronomy itself, because Deuteronomy is basically a summarization of the whole book of the law, Deuteronomy itself, it's believed, was to be read before the people. It does not appear that from the time mentioned in Joshua 8:30 and the days of Joshua, many hundreds of years before this time, at which time this public reading first took place after the death of Moses, Joshua read it before the people, till the reign of Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 17:7, that there was any public seventh year reading, a period of 530 years in between Joshua's time and Jehoshaphat. 530 years. The next seventh year reading was not till this 18th year of the reign of Josiah. Nor do we find any publicly mentioned readings like this mentioned from this time till the return from the Babylonish captivity in Nehemiah 8:2 with Ezra. So you can tell just how neglected that the commands of God truly were among the Israelites. It's then that we read in 2 Kings 23 how the king commanded Hilkiah, the high priest, and the priest of the second order, and the keepers of the door, to bring forth out of the temple of the Lord, out of Solomon's temple, all the vessels that were made for Baal, and for the grove, Ashtoreth, and all of these, and for all the host of heaven. And he burned them outside of Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and carried the ashes of them unto Bethel. I found this just so bizarre, simply because of the fact that until his mid-20s, they left these idols within Solomon's temple. That's how fresh idolatry still was in the land. But then once that he's a grown man and he understands and he's convicted within his heart, he says, do away with all of these things. Verse 5 then goes on, and Josiah put down the idolatrous priest, whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places in the cities of Judah, and in the places round about Jerusalem, them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the planets, and to all the host of heaven. And he brought out the grove from the house of the Lord, outside of Jerusalem, unto the brook Kidron, and burned it at the brook Kidron, and stamped it small to powder, and cast the powder thereof upon the graves of the children of the people. And here's the layout of Jerusalem just for scope. Here's the temple facing east, the Kidron Valley, and Hinnom Valley. Remember both of these locations because they practiced idolatry not just within Solomon's temple itself, amazingly, but they not only practiced idolatry within the city, but also outside the city. Verse 7 then goes on to tell us about another incredibly evil thing that the people were doing that Josiah himself had to put a stop to. And he brake down the houses of the Sodomites that were by the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the grove. It's at this point that Pulpit commented, the near vicinity is an indication that the galley took part in the foreign rites introduced into the temple by Manasseh and Ammon. The awful profanation of the house of God by such orgies is too terrible to even dwell on. And Joseph Benson commented, can any wonder that wrath not to be quenched was kindled against this city and people? Verse 10 then continues, and Josiah defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, in the Hinnom Valley, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Moloch. They would sacrifice their children in the Hinnom Valley. And the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon the king of Israel had builded for Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Zidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon, did the king defile. So these old high places of worship that Solomon, hundreds of years before, that Solomon himself had set up for his many wives, they remained even during the time of Asa and Hezekiah, King Josiah and Joash. None of these kings before Josiah thought to put these things down, or perhaps they did desire to take down these idolatrous places, but they feared the people. They feared losing popularity and then being dethroned. Josiah appears to not have cared one bit. Verse 14 then continues, and he brake in pieces the images and cut down the groves and filled their places with the bones of men. So why would Josiah feel the need to scatter dead men's bones about these old places of idolatrous worship? Well, Pulpit once again commented on this. Whatever spoke of death and dissolution, like dead men's bones, was a special defilement to shrines where the gods worshipped were deities of productivity and generation. You see, oftentimes they would go up to these idols and they would ask them about more children or for a good harvest, something that was life-bringing. So to place dead men's things right there, that was to defile it. Now pay special attention to verse 15. Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel, where Jeroboam had set up one of the golden calves hundreds of years before, moreover, the altar that was at Bethel, not the golden calf itself, because it's believed that the Assyrians or one of those had already taken the golden calves. But moreover, the altar that was at Bethel and the high place which Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made, both that altar and the high place he brake down, and burned the high place, and stamped it small to powder, and burned the grove. And with that, we see one of the more specific details of the prophecy being fulfilled that was told unto Jeroboam as he burned incense unto the golden calf, that a man named Josiah would one day come in and destroy the altar. But much more than that was intended by the Lord, because we see Josiah not just destroying that altar, but destroying all the altars everywhere. And as Josiah turned himself, he spied the sepulchres, these grave sites, that were there in the mount, and sent and took the bones out of the sepulchres, and burned them upon the altar, and polluted it, according to the word of the Lord, which the man of God proclaimed unto Jeroboam hundreds of years before. Then he said, What title is that I see? And the men of the city told him, It is the sepulchre of the man of God, which came from Judah, and proclaimed these things that thou hast done against the altar of Bethel. So he seized the grave site of the very prophet himself. And he said, Let him alone. Let no man move his bones. So they let his bones alone with the bones of the prophet that came out of Samaria. And all the houses also of the high places that were in the cities of Samaria, which the kings of Israel had made to provoke the Lord to anger, Josiah took away, and did to them according to all the acts that he had done in Bethel. So he's just destroying all of it. And not just in Judah, but also, as we're being told, to the north, where he also probably had much power over them at that time, because once again, that was a fallen state. Verse 20 then continues, And he slew all the priests of the high places that were there upon the altars, and burned men's bones upon them, and returned to Jerusalem. This would have been a very traumatic scene to witness, as a matter of fact. There's a lot of bloodshed, there's a lot of destruction going on, but it's really the Lord, through the king, cleaning house for this one last revival before they go into the Babylonian captivity. And the king commanded all the people, saying, Keep the Passover unto the Lord your God, as it is written in the book of this covenant. Isn't it something, once that the idols are done away with and all the false gods are clear of people's minds and they're burned up, suddenly we see this great type of Christ with the Lamb being slain for the people at the Passover. Surely there was not holden such a Passover from the days of the judges that judged Israel hundreds and hundreds of years before, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel, nor of the kings of Judah. Moreover, the workers with familiar spirits, and the wizards, and the images, and the idols, it's speaking of those in whom worked witchcraft, not just the priests of the high places, but also any in whom practice any other foreign thing. Moreover, the workers with familiar spirits, and the wizards, and the images, and the idols, and all the abominations that were spied in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, did Josiah put away, that he might perform the words of the law, which were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of the Lord. And like unto him was there no king before him that turned to the Lord with all his heart, and with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses. Neither after him arose there any like him. So the Lord brings this great revival through King Josiah, and then we read about this towards the end of his life. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, meaning he had set this revival in order, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. And notice right here how Josiah cuts off the Pharaoh right in the midst of the valley of Megiddo. But why did Josiah do this? The battle was not against him. Josiah went out against him, Matthew Poole commented, either to defend his own country from Pharaoh's incursions, he may have thought there was some sort of invasion against him, or, the more likely scenario, to assist the king of Babylon, with whom he seems to have been in league with at that time. 2 Chronicles 35:21 then tells us that Pharaoh then sent ambassadors to Josiah, saying, What have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I come not against thee this day, but against the house wherewith I have war. For God commanded me to make haste, forbear thee from meddling with God, who is with me, that he destroy thee not. And the commentators are in agreement about this for the most part, that God is truly moving Pharaoh to go to war against the king of Babylon, and Josiah is interrupting this. Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself. Notice that Josiah, much like Ahab in the days of Elijah, Josiah disguised himself that he might fight with him, and hearkened not unto the words of Necho from the mouth of God. and came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And this is the only blemish that we can really find in Josiah's reign, that he did go against God in this. And I totally agree with Knapp on his commentary at this section. It was not of faith, else why disguise himself? There is no record of any prayer before the battle, as in the case of so many of his godly ancestors, and this rash act of Josiah seems unaccountable. Verse 23 then goes on to tell us, "And the archers shot at King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, 'Have me away, for I am sore wounded.'" And sadly, this does so look like the very same scenario that played out with King Ahab, Jezebel's husband, one of the most evil of all kings. And it's happening to this very godly king, about how Ahab disguised himself, went into battle, and then an arrow at a venture was fired into the air and struck him, and he winds up dying, being carried in a chariot much like Josiah. His servants therefore took him out of that chariot and put him in the second chariot that he had, and they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died, and was buried in one of the sepulchres of his fathers. And all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah. He was a very beloved king, just as verse 25 so indicates. And the prophet Jeremiah himself lamented for Josiah. And all the singing men and the singing women spake of Josiah in their lamentations to this day, and made them an ordinance in Israel. And behold, they are written in the lamentations. Isn't it something how it's noted in the scripture itself, how Jeremiah wept over the death of Josiah? Yet Jeremiah would so strongly rebuke the descendants that came immediately after him. In just over 20-year period, the Babylonian captivity would then commence, ending with the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of Solomon's temple, in which Josiah painstakingly had built up.